yeah, I'll start with really my first endeavor, which I did when I was 18, right out of high school. Pretty fresh. I picked out this 110-liter backpack at a garage sale. For reference, that's about double the size of this one. And of course, I proceeded to fill it up with a bunch of useless crap. And I hit the trail in Colorado. I had a job out there. I had one of my friends drop me off on the 285, and I stuck out my thumb for the very first time and worked my way all the way down to Buena Vista. I'm not sure anybody familiar with Colorado, sort of central. And I hopped onto the Colorado Trail with the ambition of doing the Collegiate Peaks Loop, which, is, this 180 mile, or let's see, 80 and 80, more like 140 mile loop on the Colorado Trail. And so my goal was to hike 20 miles a day, and with my backpack, I had these big old boots on. And for reference, this is the kind of outfit I wear on trail now. But I was probably wearing jeans or some really heavy pants, and I just went for it. And after my first day hiking, I managed to do the 20 miles, but I was hurting pretty bad. It was just overwhelming. The weight, I think probably weighed about 65 pounds. Welcome. Help yourself to tangerines too. And usually the way I do this is I incentivize questions with tangerines, but I've just had so many tangerines. It's unrealistic to hope for that many questions, but please interrupt me at any time with questions. So day 2, I managed to get down those 20 miles yet again, and I was doing even worse the next night. By day 3, I still got the 20 miles, but by the time I got to Tin Cup Pass, 60 miles in, I could not walk anymore. Yes?
What is useless in a backpack?
So really, all the gear is necessary, right? You need a tent, you need a sleeping bag, you might need a berry canister, but I guess it's the kind of gear you're bringing. So for me, it was my first trip, and I didn't have a big budget, so it was stuff I picked up at a garage sale. Also, clothes is a big killer. It really is useless to have 5 pairs of socks and 6 undershirts and things that you would pack for a normal week of vacation. But on the trail, everything is different. You might, be able to get it down to 1 or 2, pairs of clothes for your trip. So really being intentional about what you pack. There's this saying, every ounce counts, because over 1,000 miles, if you sort of calculate that out, it adds up. A lot of people even break their toothbrush in half just to sort of save that. Now that's kind of more just because it's an easy thing to do and it's kind of cute, everybody does it. But it's that mentality of trying to get as light as possible. So back to that story, when I, arrived at Tin Cup Pass, I ended up staying there for 3 days just to recover. I didn't hike a single mile, maybe half a mile just to the water and back. But it was really just, me sort of evaluating what I was doing outside. Why had I come out here? Just to destroy myself, to be miserable? I mean, that last day of hiking before I got in, I got in well into dark, and I dodged thunderstorms the whole day. Colorado's famous for their afternoon thunderstorms. And so that really allowed me to think a little bit about why I was out there. I'm grateful that I did have that chance. One of the things that I really like to impress is that backpacking is an evolution. Your mentality, your gear, your body are all changing over time. And as you go, you can grow, or you can sort of hit a peak. I think with gear, I've sort of the past 2 years has been pretty steady, but certainly my mind continues to change, and why I'm on trail, the things I'm observing and doing continue to change. So after that, I hitched into town, got back to Buena Vista and reloaded on food, came back on trail. I still had about 4 or 5 days left to backpack, but I came in at a little closer area, and I just did about 10 miles a day, and it was a game changer. I got in at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, set up the tent, played some ukulele, met people, and I had a really, really amazing time. And that was sort of the beginning of my backpacking career, if you will. And it did really set the tone for all the hikes that I've done since then, and all the hikes that I've continued to do. sort of your expectation versus what is your experience. And this is kind of universal to anything you endeavor in. But on the trail, it's such a big experience that the expectations versus reality are magnified themselves. So we can get into specific trails if you want to. So that was, part of the Colorado Trail. I proceeded to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail after that. Then next year I was back on the Colorado Trail for a little 100-mile jaunt. I think then I decided to do the Pacific Crest Trail. So I spent 4 months on that and did 1,500 miles. And then most recently, I finished through hiking the Colorado Trail, and that was only about a week ago. No, not a week ago, about a month ago that I finished. Time. So on the Colorado Trail, let's see, I had about 4 days to go, and I was pretty tired from a day of ascents and descents. It was, the Colorado, the Rockies are pretty infamous for that continuous elevation change. So at about 15 miles, I decided to set up my tent and just stretch it out. That's kind of my big routine. After a day of hiking, I like to spend 15, 20 minutes just feeling my body and stretching it. Something I really encourage, whether you're doing a 5-mile hike or a 15-mile hike, but especially if you're doing a through hike and you're doing large mileage, there's this tendency to sort of ignore the body and push past the pain, which sometimes is useful. But at the end of the day, you really want to feel yourself and make sure you're all good and, give your body a little break. So anyways, I'd set up my tent and I decided to go seek out the ridgeline for sunset. It was about a half a mile off trail, and it's a pretty remote area of the trail. And as I was enjoying the sunset, I noticed a little movement out of the corner of my eye. Now, it was definitely too small to be a black bear, and way too big to have been a marmot that had been following me for hundreds of miles since then. And in a moment of just total shock, surprise, and something that I had thought about for many, many miles, but never actually thought would happen, I realized I was looking eye to eye with a mountain lion. She was about 60 feet away from me, and her fur was as gray as the rock beneath her. Muscular body, huge paws. With a single swipe, I would have been pretty devastated. But her eyes reflected the same shock that I had in my own eyes. It's a little bit of a strange experience seeing an animal like that, and I was sort of trembling in fear, and she was just as surprised to see me. And about what felt like 15 minutes, but probably more realistically closer to 30 seconds to a minute, she sort of turned around and walked away. And that, that's been a really big experience for me, having seen that. It's pretty rare to see a mountain lion. And I definitely... What? Yes, I was. In fact, yeah, and walking back that half mile, I was just like, just couldn't relax. But when I got to the tent, I'd set up at a pretty established campsite. It was right off trail. And yes,
weapons to defend yourself?
I have no weapons on trail aside from a pocket knife about this size, and it's primarily used to cut salami. So this is a really, really great topic. And the reason I tell this story is certainly not to scare people away from the trail, because, being outside, being in these incredibly remote areas, you are interacting with nature in a pretty raw way. And for me, the reason I get outside is because this is about as raw as I can get in the society that we live in, as back to the former times of living. Coming to contact with a mountain lion or bears are extremely common, especially on a trail like the Appalachian Trail, but even the Pacific Crest Trail, if you do plan on doing it, you will see some impressive wildlife. And something like a big knife or a gun isn't the way to, in my opinion, the way to approach the wildlife around you. They really aren't out to get you, and sort of every time I've given this talk, I've been looking right across from this Lance Sword 101, and they're all the way, where is it? Wildlife, more afraid of you than you it, and maybe that's true, maybe not, but the idea is really important, that these animals aren't out to get you. They are predators, but not for humans. And certainly in areas like a trail where there's a decent amount of foot traffic, mountain lions are very hyper aware of the activities going on. Not like bears, they seem to be totally oblivious. But the mountain lions know. And so, you know, being aware of your own surroundings and being mindful, really trying to take care of as you go, that's, you know, kind of the best safety tip I can give. And safety is so poignant on trail, you know, but really the biggest threat that I've noticed to hikers, okay, number one, themselves, because they're just pushing themselves too hard, blisters and soreness and gear. But number two, usually generally tends to be weather, which people don't think about. But weather can be far more dangerous than, you know, an animal, a lightning storm, or we were talking about a barren desert without water. These are the things that can really get you. So, you know, doing your research and preparing properly. We can get really in depth with the gear a little bit later, but one piece of advice I would like to impart is testing out your gear before you use it. Now, I know it seems incredibly intuitive and obvious, but quite a few people I've met on trail were using these things for the first time with the ideal of, you know, using them for 1,000, 2,000, maybe even more miles. This is your home, your shelter, your water filtration, your clothes. This is everything. When you're on trail, your life is on your back. And preparing properly and making sure that everything is well in order and works for you is of the utmost importance. So one of my favorite experiences that I did have on trail, on the Pacific Crest Trail, was after sort of midway. I was thinking about taking a lunch break. This was near the Yosemite area, a little south. And I ran into this older fellow, probably in his late 60s, and he was camping out, not backpacking, but he was a photographer, and he had a pretty decent-sized looking camera. And we got to talking a little bit, and I eventually coaxed him into showing me some of the photos he had taken. And I was really surprised with what I saw. They were photo after photo of dead trees. Every single one. There wasn't a single picture of a mountain ridge or a vista or any of the sort of typical grandeur that you experience in the outdoors. Just one after another, dead trees. And, you know, I thought it was kind of strange. He sort of mentioned something about looking in the detail, and I didn't brush it off, but it didn't really internalize. It was only that night when I was sort of flipping through my own photos when it really hit me, you know. One photo after another, all I had taken pictures of were these vast mountain ranges. And they started to bleed together. They sort of all looked the same. One mountain ridge after another snow-capped peak, after another high point, after another pass. And it was a little bit disconcerting that, you know, this was a little over halfway through my trail, over two and a half months of walking. And my collection of photos was essentially, you know, one picture or two pictures. And so what I came to realize, and what sort of became a huge theme of my hike as I went,